have with us in the studio now an economist, Paul Igbinoba. Many thanks for joining us on TVC Breakfast this morning.
Good morning.
We're focusing on the ministry, the appropriation bill for 2017 and the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. But before we go into that, let's look at some of the assumptions for 2016 budget and the scorecard, if you will.
Well, the assumptions include the production of 2.2 million barrels of oil per day. It also includes an exchange rate of 305.
No, this is for 2017. The assumption I'm talking about is that of 2016. Where did we go wrong for 2016? For 2016, of course, the production rate was also put at 2.2.
Exactly.
But we ended up having about 1.9, 1.5,
even
less
than that.
1.6.
And of course, the inflation rate was put at about, I think, 12%, and I mean 9.8%. That was the inflation rate for 2006. And what we have right now is 18.40 something, 18.46. That's
18.4.
That's what we have right now. And then, of course, talk about the exchange rate, which was put at 197, 195.
Okay, 195.
Yes, and what we end up having now is about 400. So those are the assumptions. How wrong or how far-fetched were those assumptions?
We could say, with the benefit of hindsight, that some of those assumptions were not entirely realistic. Well, to an extent, that's the nature of budget. You know, you can always predict the future. Where the government really we had a rather ambitious budget for 2016. But there were many factors beyond the control of government. And to an extent, too, I'm not too sure those factors were managed as well as they could have been managed. For example, the challenge in the Niger Delta, I think, could have been managed much better, because it is essentially a political problem. You know, so if government had been more engaging, more forthcoming, more willing to negotiate, more flexible in its stance, perhaps a lot more could have been achieved in that sector. We have no control over the price of oil in the international market, but we have control over a whole lot of things locally, you know. And then again, of course, going back to the basic issue of policy, you know, market-driven policies, that is a critical challenge we have. Because again, the federal government was not as forthcoming and as engaging and as flexible as it could have been. Because basically, the issue with foreign exchange market is policy. Simple. Just deregulate, allow the market to be free. That's it. And when that happens, things will just take, it may take some time, 6 months to a year, but things will fall into shape. And supply and demand issues will be sorted out. And you discover that the Naira we find is real value, perhaps even less than what we have now. The gap between the official and the foreign market will just crash, you know, and that will sort out so many issues. So I think that is so fundamental, and even in this year's budget, that issue is still not being addressed.
Okay.
In fact, that brings me to the question, because when she was asking about assumptions, certainly any budget, it's always a proposal, it's a projection, what it would look like. Now, we have these assumptions: 2.2 million barrels of oil, crude oil per day, about 40, predicated at $48, 42.5 per day, and then at the exchange rate of about 305. And inflation rate is about 18.4, as the case may be. With all of this, how realistic, how optimistic would you be for the optimal implementation of the 2017 budget? Is a question I'd like you to answer when we come back on this break. We'll go on a break now, and we'll come back to dwell more on this. But don't forget, at the top of the hour will be time for us to go on news updates, and Ikechi Kobienu is standing by already for that. Stay with us on TVC Breakfast.
All right, glad to have you back. Our guest is still here with us in the studio, Mr. Egbinoba. Now, just before we went on break, Mike was asking you a question.
Yeah, I was asking how optimistic you were with all of this projections, all these assumptions that are on ground, because we said earlier on, or you said earlier on, that 2016 budget did not address some of these things. Things didn't work as far as the assumptions were concerned. Now we have the same assumption in the 2017 budget. So how optimistic or how realistic do you think it will be in implementing 2017 budget to full?
I think first we should start from a more positive note.
Okay.
I really want to commend the government for the $753 billion capital expenditure that was made between May and October this year. I think that's quite commendable. I mean, that's like equal to the entire capital budget of the previous year. I mean, you can see the evidence of this all over the place. You know, road constructions.
I'm asking. In what evidence?
Of the capital expenditure.
Yes.
Of 753
You have more light.
billion.
You have more water.
No, I mean in terms of road construction, of construction activities going on all over the country. I think that is positive. But coming back to the new proposals, I think the same challenges we had last year are still there. First of all, the 2.2 million barrels per day assumption. How realistic is it? Because for as long as the problem with the militants in the Niger Delta are not addressed effectively, that 2.2 million barrels will still be like a mirage.
But they've increased the vote for amnesty program. That's about 60 billion.
Exactly.
So
okay, well, that's positive.
With our help.
That can help, but that's still partial because the issues go beyond the amnesty program.
One would even say, how sustainable is that?
Well, but that again is positive. You know, governance is difficult. So when you do the right thing, we just must commend them. You know, but I think in the long term, there's a need for a more robust engagement with the stakeholders in that region because it's so critical. You know, I think the strong arm tactic of the military option cannot really achieve much. It could just achieve a little in the short term. In the long run, it will be entirely counterproductive. So I think the president in particular really needs to be more forthcoming. He should be more willing to negotiate, more flexible. And he should have an all-inclusive, all-stakeholder approach to how we get results. The issue there is political. So if we can solve the Niger Delta challenge, then of course we can realistically expect to produce 2.2 million barrels, or even more, because we have more oil wells are being developed and all that. I think that's very important. Now, when it comes to the oil price benchmark, I think that sounds realistic.
Okay.
Because the oil price is just rising, you know, because the OPEC and other oil producers have been able to engage themselves and reach some kind of agreement on the production cutbacks. So that is going to that price I think is realistic. Now, when it comes to the
sorry, before you go for that, let's take a little more on the benchmark, the $42.5
million per barrel.
Dollars
Sorry,
per barrel.
for $2.5 per barrel.
Yes. Okay. So if we have that, and right now what we have as price of crude is about 57, 51, 57. That's what it's going out now. Now, picture that against the excess crude account and the amount set aside to be borrowed. It's a budget of deficit, for instance.
Yeah.
So put that aside, just oppose that with what we have. If we can exceed the benchmark, we have more excess crude accounts.
Yeah.
Do we still need to borrow?
Yeah, I mean, the excess crude account is for the future, really. It's not for current spend. If, for example, we are able to produce the 2.2 million barrels or close to it, and then we have the current price of oil above $50 per barrel throughout next year. Certainly, there'll be quite a reasonable accretion to the excess crude account. I mean, that we'll be able to save quite some money. But so that money that we saved wouldn't be used well. Part of it could be used to finance, to close the deficit, the budget deficit gap. Because right now, government intends to borrow 2.36 trillion naira, I mean, which is over 30% of the budget. That is huge, all right? About 45% of that will be from external sources. Now, you see, until the federal government engages with the international financial community, now what I mean, for example, the IMF, you shouldn't expect to make much progress in borrowing a huge chunk of money externally. Because the IMF is there to, sort of, to give an endorsement to the soundness of your economic, plan. Now, we are aware that just recently, Egypt was able to come to an agreement with the IMF that led to the IMF give them quite a landmark $12 billion facility. But mind you, what the IMF gives the country is not so much the quantum of the value of that matters. It's actually a policy loan. It means that the IMF has endorsed the soundness of your fiscal and monetary and trade policies. And that gives a green light to the international financial community to engage with you, to do business with you. Foreign investors, FDI for them, others, portfolio investors, foreign direct investment, and lenders generally to do business with you. And Nigeria's stance is so much far from that right now. It's like the president has a visceral kind of stance. I mean, he's just opposed to anything IMF. He doesn't want to hear it. But that, to me, is not a business-like stance. We need to change that.
Okay, now, if we have to predicate it on what you're saying right now, we know that Nigeria has, the president himself and government officials have traveled parts of the world to try to lure investors into the country.
Yes.
From China, from Germany, and other parts of the world. Now, from what you said, is Nigeria attractive enough for these investors to be invited, for them to come to Nigeria to invest?
The problem is that Nigeria is not ready for business.
Why do you say that?
We're not ready for business. For as long as we don't do those things that foreign investors expect us to do, for example, to free up the foreign exchange market, because if they bring the money here, how sure are they that they can get it out when it be? So, fine, the president has been traveling, it's okay. Nigeria needs to be promoted, we need road shows. But beyond that too, we need to sort out ourselves, set our house in order economically. And that simply is economic policies.
How far?
This is not rocket science. Just put in place market-focused, market-friendly, liberal economic policy framework. Let the market determine prices. In a democracy, it's not just going to vote every 4 years. It cuts across every strata, every area of decision making. All right? We need to democratize our economic decision making. Not one person, the president or some people out there, determining what, for example, the exchange rate should be. But all our collective demand and supply for foreign exchange is what should determine what the price of the dollar, naira should be. So that is the value of market forces. The market forces are democracy in the marketplace. When it comes to the price of petroleum products, the same thing. Let supply and demand forces. Let economic actors interact among themselves, determine price. Let there be price discovery. So that is democracy, and this is why the Western economies are thriving, because they have democratized every sector of society. So government's effort is just minimized to providing the legal and framework for things to happen. That is what is lacking here. And the IMF is not the monster it used to be. The IMF is so much reformed.
So it was a monster?
Yeah, I mean,
or maybe they have reformed the ways and come up with different strategies to hold countries now.
You wouldn't blame President Buhari for perhaps.
I say monster in quotes, because in the past, during the structural adjustment program, they recommended strictly economic policies which in theory can work, okay, without taking into account the political consequences which the governments of those countries had to face. But now you could see in Christine Lagarde, her approach is so diplomatic, it's so sensitive.
Well, some Nigerians will say he's just coming from the back door instead of coming from the front door. But we'll come back to this. Yeah. We'll come back to this. Let's go on a break and we'll come back to dwell more on what we're talking about, investments and trade in Nigeria. Stay with us on TVC Breakfast. Just joining us, you're watching TVC Breakfast, and we're discussing trade and investment in Nigeria. We have an economist, Paul Igbinoba, with us in the studio. We've been talking about this. Now, Paul, the president and even the government has been very frontal with the issue of Made in Nigeria. You know, Made in Nigeria, the dream, the program, the project, and so on. But how effective would that be in attracting, or maybe boosting, let me even say, in boosting economic activity within the country?
Yeah, well, that should boost local production. Because basically, if Nigerians you can eat what our own foods, that will boost production of food. You know, between boost farming, agriculture, and processing and all that. If we can wear what we produce locally, I mean, that's a huge market. That will create jobs for textile industry, cotton, garment industry. You know, if we can wear our own shoes. For example, right now the largest shoe producer globally, surprisingly you might say, is Ethiopia. Nigeria is the largest producer of hides and skins, but Ethiopia is the largest producer of finished leatherworks, shoes, bags, and all, what have you. It's a major driver of their economy. Ethiopia also has a huge textile industry. This to me is a challenge to us. Ethiopia is in Africa, it's a landlocked country, you know, and here we are, we're the largest producer of hides and skins, but we are nowhere to be found in shoe production, for example, and we're nowhere to be found in textile production. So if we can produce and consume what we produce, it will be a big plus to boosting the economy.
You use the word roadshow. Roadshow is important, but we need to go beyond the concept of roadshow. Now, when the government has, in fact, the Senate President, the House of Rep Speaker, the President, all of them have talked about Made in Nigeria one way or the other. Do you see any strategy? Because it is far, when we say if this can be done, it's just still an assumption, a projection. Are there any tangible strategies on ground to look into what you're talking about? If you go to Aba, if you go to Newi, you go to Ibadan, you go to Benue, all of them, they have different things they're doing that is made in Nigeria.
Yeah. Well, right now, consuming what we produce locally is an imperative. We really have no choice, you know, because there's this foreign exchange crunch, all right? We just read how the import in this quarter in this season reduced 76% compared to last year because of scarcity of foreign exchange. So it is an imperative.
Are you seeing any tangible strategy so far?
Well, first of all, we need a policy, we need a mental reorientation.
But are you seeing any tangible
But let
strategy?
governments started. If you say that change begins with me, let this change
have they started
of made Nigeria product, consuming what is produced locally, let it start with government. Let them buy innocent model vehicles, for example. Let it be clear that Nigerian leaders are wearing our local fabrics.
Are you seeing that strategy?
Well, I hope that will happen, soon enough.
Well, during the presentation of this appropriation bill, the president's speech, let me try and read some excerpt from that. It says, talking about local content and empowering local business. So the role of government must be to facilitate, enable and support the economic activities of the Nigerian businesses, talking about fiscal, monetary and trade policies that will be fully aligned and underpinned by the use of policy instruments to promote import substitution.
Well,
that is the government's, that is the president's speech during the appropriation bill. Now, let's look at some of the perhaps safety nets, some kind of guards that have been put into this 2017 appropriation bill. One of them, the president said, was to give 50 billion naira for export processing and special economic zones.
Yes.
How would that help?
Well, that's important. That's part of the 80 billion naira for the trade and investment sector. That's important. That will generate local production. You know, we need to encourage more local production in the export processing zones.
Yes.
And also, I'm glad that now, instead of talking about geopolitical zones, we're not talking about special economic zones. Very important. I mean, even that amount is like a drop in the ocean, but let's start with that. You know, that will help. You know, but looking more generally at the trade and investment, you know, scenario,
Yes.
and environment, it's good to know that government is embracing PPP. Of course, we had always had the ICRC, that's the Infrastructure Concession and Regulatory Commission there, but they've been doing so little because government have been doing little of PPP, you know, contracting. Now we are forced to embrace public-private partnership. It's a huge avenue for infrastructure project development. It's cost-effective, value for money, and requires very little of government-owned direct funding. You know, so policy is important. I'm glad that we have that. I'm also glad that there's other. Okay, you also mentioned the export processing zones.
Yeah, it is
Okay.
13 billion for recapitalization of Bank of Industry.
Yeah,
That's talking about access to credit.
15 billion and all that, yes, it's important. But then what I didn't get to hear much, I didn't get to hear the word private sector.
Okay.
I didn't get to hear the word privatization. These are policy issues.
Okay.
You see, government should know that it should really say it in words, in writing, and in their body language that the private sector should be the engine of growth. In that whole speech, nothing was said about private sector directly. You know, the emphasis wasn't there at the private sector as engine of growth. Nothing was said about privatizing. You see,
Except for the president, Senate
you see,
President's speech. He made mention of that before the
If you're talking
president.
about change, apart from the cosmetics of change, you know, the propaganda of change, economically, what are the real changes? The change means economic reform. It is not happening. It is not happening.
All right. Paul Igbinoba, thank you very much for coming on the program this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Stay with us. We'll go on a break and then we come back to dwell more on other issues. Stay with us.